Picture this. It's dawn in a British trench near Ypres, 1917, and you need to use the toilet immediately. The nearest latrine sits 40 yards back down a communication trench, in full view of a German sniper who has already killed 2 men crossing that same stretch this week. So you grab an empty bully beef tin, crouch in a narrow recess cut into the trench wall, and do your business 3 feet from where you eat, sleep, and fight. This is not a rare inconvenience. This happened to millions of men every single day across 4 years of a war that used tanks, poison gas, and aircraft, weapons decades ahead of anything humanity had built before. And yet the plumbing available to a British soldier in 1917 was, in some ways, worse than what a Roman legionary had access to nearly 2,000 years earlier. Roman forts along Hadrian's Wall had stone latrine blocks with running water underneath the seats, flushing waste away automatically, built around the year 124. Soldiers in the most technologically advanced war on the planet were relieving themselves into tin cans because walking to a proper toilet could get them shot. Let's actually look at how this problem got handled. Because armies had to solve it every day or lose entire units to disease before the enemy fired a shot. The formal system, at least on paper, worked like this. Battalions dug latrine pits behind the front line, usually a few dozen yards down a short spur trench branching off the main line, sometimes called a sump or a thunderbox setup. A simple wooden pole ran across the top of a deep pit. Soldiers sat on the pole, and the whole arrangement got doused regularly with chloride of lime, a disinfectant powder meant to cut the smell and kill bacteria. British and Commonwealth armies formalized sanitary sections within each battalion starting around 1915. Soldiers specifically assigned to maintain latrines, bury waste, and manage lime supplies. It sounds almost bureaucratic for a war zone, and that's exactly the point. Without that structure, entire units collapsed from disease long before a single shell landed near them. Because the alternative to a working latrine system was catastrophic. Dysentery and diarrheal disease tore through trench populations on every front of the war. British Army medical records list gastrointestinal illness as one of the leading causes of hospital admission, running into the hundreds of thousands of cases across the full conflict, a number that rivaled admissions for actual combat wounds in some periods. Trench fever, spread by lice thriving in unwashed uniforms and crowded, unsanitary trenches, sidelined an estimated 500,000 Allied troops over the course of the war, according to later medical surveys. None of these men needed to be shot to become useless to their unit. A single contaminated water source or overflowing latrine pit could pull dozens of soldiers off the line within days. The frontline fire trench itself almost never had a real latrine at all, because the front line was the worst possible place to dig one. Soldiers stationed directly at the parapet, especially during a bombardment or at night when climbing out of the trench meant risking a sniper round, used empty ration tins, usually the same tins their bully beef and jam came in, kept specifically for that purpose in a small carved-out alcove along the trench wall. Officers wrote home describing the arrangement bluntly, men relieving themselves inches from where they stood watch, the tin emptied over the parapet or into a nearby shell hole whenever it was safe enough to do so. This wasn't a failure of discipline. It was simple math. A 10-second dash to a proper latrine 40 yards back could end in a bullet, and soldiers made that calculation correctly, night after night, by staying exactly where they were. Communication trenches leading back to the latrine pits became genuine bottlenecks after dark, when hundreds of men from the same company tried to use the same narrow route within the same few hours, sometimes queuing in single file behind a man already using the pit, all in near total darkness with rifles slung and boots sinking in mud. French trenches ran a similar improvised system called les feuillets, simple slit trenches sometimes lined with straw or leaves, dug and abandoned as units rotated through a section of line. German trenches, particularly by 1916 and later, tended toward more permanent construction generally, including in some sectors actual concrete latrine bunkers built into deeper, more fortified trench systems, since German engineering doctrine on the Western Front favored digging in for the long term, rather than treating trenches as temporary. That difference in construction style shows up clearly in surviving trench maps and post-war engineering surveys, where German positions consistently used more concrete and permanent fixtures than the equivalent British or French sections nearby. Officers, predictably, arranged things differently for themselves. Multiple soldier memoirs from the war describe separate, sometimes marginally more private latrine arrangements reserved for officers, set apart from the shared pits used by enlisted men. A small but consistent detail across accounts from different sectors and different years of the war. Now, rewind almost 2,000 years, because the Romans had already solved a version of this problem with more sophistication than anyone managing it in 1917. The fort at Housesteads along Hadrian's Wall, built starting around the year 124, contains a stone latrine block seating around 20 soldiers at once, side by side, over a channel that used flowing water diverted from a nearby tank to carry waste away continuously. Roman soldiers also used a shared cleaning tool, a sponge fixed to a stick and rinsed in a trough of running water between uses, a detail archaeologists have confirmed at multiple fort sites across the empire. It was communal. It offered no privacy by modern standards, but it moved waste away from where soldiers lived and slept using continuously flowing water, a level of sanitation engineering that simply did not exist in a 1917 trench system built under artillery fire with whatever timber and pits could be dug at night. The problem is far from unique to World War I. During Napoleon's Russian campaign of 1812, camp sanitation collapsed almost immediately once the army began its long retreat from Moscow, and typhus, spread partly through the same crowded, filthy conditions that came with poor latrine discipline, killed soldiers by the tens of thousands, arguably more than combat did during the retreat itself. Historians studying the campaign's medical records consistently point to disease, not Russian bullets, as the leading cause of death among Napoleon's retreating soldiers. By the Pacific Theater in World War II, American Marines dug simple slit trenches for toilets whenever a position held for more than a few hours, and used empty ration cans in a pinch during active combat, echoing almost exactly the same improvised system British soldiers had used a generation earlier. Marine memoirs from Peleliu and Okinawa describe dysentery running through units constantly, worsened by tropical heat, monsoon flooding, and the simple impossibility of digging and maintaining proper latrines while under fire. The Vietnam War brought its own specific version of the problem, and one detail from that war has become almost infamous among veterans: burning the waste. American bases commonly use simple outhouse structures built over half sections of steel drum, and disposing of the contents required pulling the drums out, dousing them in diesel fuel, and burning the waste down, a task universally hated and typically assigned on rotation to whichever soldier had drawn the short straw that week. Veterans across multiple units and tours describe this specific chore independently in oral histories and written memoirs, consistent enough across sources that it reads as standard practice rather than an isolated detail from one base. Modern military has eventually turned waste disposal into an actual engineering and health problem worth solving properly, though not without controversy. American bases in Iraq and Afghanistan relied heavily on open-air burn pits to destroy waste of every kind, plastics, medical waste, and human waste included. And veterans exposed to the smoke from those pits later reported respiratory illness at rates serious enough that the United States passed the PACT Act in 2022, formally recognizing burn pit exposure as a service-connected health risk for hundreds of thousands of veterans. Chemical toilets and sealed waste bags became more standard at forward operating bases, specifically because burn pits had created a documented health crisis of their own. So, the picture that emerges across every one of these wars looks remarkably consistent. Armies spend enormous resources on weapons, armor, and tactics, and the basic problem of where a soldier relieves himself keeps getting solved with whatever is cheapest, fastest, and least likely to get him killed in the process. Tin cans, slit trenches, steel drums, or a hastily dug pit behind the line. The Romans figured out flowing water and shared stone benches nearly 2,000 years before anyone thought to apply the same engineering to a First World War trench. And it took modern militaries until the 21st century to treat waste disposal itself as a health hazard worth real institutional attention. Soldiers coped with the total absence of privacy the way they coped with most miseries of trench life, through dark humor. Contemporary slang turned chronic diarrhea into the trots, and unit newspapers like the Wipers Times ran running jokes about latrine conditions, a coping mechanism for men who had lost any expectation of dignity along with any expectation of safety. Even the officers' slightly better arrangements were still just a pit with a screen, not real plumbing of any kind. Every army and every one of these conflicts had engineers capable of extraordinary things: bridges, fortifications, entire rail networks built under fire. And yet the humble task of moving waste away from where people lived kept losing out to more urgent priorities: ammunition, medical supplies, food, until disease numbers forced commanders to pay attention anyway. So the picture that emerges isn't really about neglect or stupidity. It's closer to a pattern repeating across every century of organized warfare. The most urgent problems get solved first, and the most basic bodily ones get patched together with whatever happens to be lying around. Somewhere between a bully beef tin in 1917 and a burning steel drum in 1969, the problem never really got solved. It just kept getting managed, one soldier, one shift, one smell at a time. And somewhere along Hadrian's Wall, the stone benches are still standing, water long since dried up. A quiet reminder that someone solved this problem properly once, a long, long time before anyone thought to try it again. That is how soldiers went to the toilet in the trenches.